My guest at this time is Jan C. Ting. He is a professor at the Temple University School of Law. He also served as Assistant Commissioner of Immigration and Naturalization Services at the Justice Department during the George H.W. Bush administration. President Trump announced Thursday he will not be shutting down the U.S. Mexican border for at least a year, but he previously said he would seriously consider it. And what exactly are his powers to do something like that? That's what we'll talk about for the next few minutes. And Professor, thanks very much for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Good to have you as always. And what I know from our previous discussions is that the president, generally speaking, has pretty broad latitude in federal law to act how he wants to act when it comes to immigration policy. What does the law say about his ability to shut down the border?
Well, I think you're correct that the president does seem to have extensive powers, and other presidents have actually used those powers on various occasions to close the border. One of the most prominent examples is after 9/11, the terrorist attacks, when President George W. Bush closed down the borders, and his justification was that it was a national emergency, which is the same justification that President Trump would use if he were to take action. So I think there's precedent for the power, and I don't think anyone has seriously questioned the ability of the president to exercise that power. The only questions have been raised about the advisability of doing so and the economic consequences of doing so. And evidently, as you say, some of those arguments have been found persuasive by the administration, at least to the point of holding off immediate action.
Yeah, he's basically giving Mexico a 12-month ultimatum here. But you're also right that both of the Republican senators from Texas strongly urged President Trump not to do this. Would shutting down the border effectively address the problem of illegal immigration?
Well, it would certainly bring pressure to bear on Mexico and, perhaps get a greater degree of cooperation than we have been having. I think Mexico has had a kind of two-sided approach to migration from other countries through Mexico to the United States. And I think they have, on the one hand, promised cooperation with the United States in trying to hold back these caravans of undocumented migrants headed for the United States. But on the other hand, they have a long humanitarian tradition, and they've historically not really cared as long as people were just passing through to the United States. So that requires some clarification, and I think the administration, our administration, is justified in trying to obtain that clarification from Mexico by considering putting some economic pressure on them.
From your experience, which covers many years at this point, what are the most effective tools to restoring order at the border and preventing as many illegal crossings as possible? We hear all sorts of different ideas. The president, of course, loves the idea of the wall. We talk about internal enforcement. We talk about high technology. We talk about E-Verify. There's so many different things, but based on your experience, what actually works best?
Well, certainly the wall is an element in an overall strategy. As others have noted, it's a force multiplier. You can only afford to put so many Border Patrol agents on the border. And having fencing up or a wall forces, makes those agents more useful. And that they can concentrate their efforts at strategic points rather than having the whole pieces of the border wide open. So the wall is part of it, but the main thing is that we have to have some help from Congress. We need legislative action. You mentioned E-Verify. That would be a big step forward, mandatory E-Verify. I mean, the E-Verify system is available now, and employers that want to can check Social Security numbers against a computerized system. And certain states like Arizona, I understand, require it of all employers. So that system is available. It just needs to be made mandatory. It's not the silver bullet's going to solve everything, but it will make a substantial impact on the ability of undocumented persons to obtain illegal employment in the United States, and that should significantly reduce the pull factor that's attracting undocumented people to the United States. So that's one plus. Then I think we have to deal with this issue of child migration to the United States. This was triggered by President Obama's DACA decision in 2012. As everyone knows, before 2012, most of the undocumented immigration was single males coming to work and send money home to their families. But once DACA was passed, this deferred action for childhood arrivals, people got the message, which was technically wrong but practically correct, that if they came with children, they were in. And that's because of special protection for children arriving at the border. Initially, it was for unaccompanied minors, but that protection has been expanded by the courts to cover basically any minors arriving. And we've had the notification that you can't detain minors. You can't detain minors even if you're detaining the whole family. So in practical terms, it has resulted in a catch-and-release policy at the border. That's one of the big problems. Since DACA was promulgated by President Obama, the message is out there that, if you're going to come to the United States without documents, then bring the kids. They have to let you go. And, the president tried separating the parents from the kids. Well, that blew up in his face. So that didn't seem to be a solution. And for the parents that are already here who came without their kids, the message was send for the kids. The kids should have no problem getting in. And that is widely understood by the undocumented people coming to the United States. I mean, the New York Times and Washington Post have printed interviews with the migrants saying, we've heard you bring the kids and you're in. So that is a wide understanding, technically not supposed to be, but in practical terms, the migrants have it right. That is the practical result of the laws, and Congress has the ability to change the laws at any time. But as we've seen repeatedly, it's very difficult in this divided Congress to try and get laws changed. Any laws, it seems.
Well, that's certainly the case. And now we have a deeper divide than ever on immigration. I mean, if you look at the early days of the Clinton administration, shortly after your time at the INS, there's famous clips of Bill Clinton giving a State of the Union address talking in very strong language about stopping illegal immigration. Folks like Harry Reid were doing the same. A decade to 15 years later, you had a lot of Democrats, including presidential candidates, voting for border fencing. Now you've got one presidential candidate, Castro of Texas, wanting to decriminalize illegal border crossings, and just about every Democrat in the field is appalled by the idea of turning folks away at the border, calling it essentially inhumane. So how did we get to this point, considering where we were just a decade or two ago?
It is an amazing change, and it happened very recently. I mean, the Democratic Party has historically always given at least lip service to enforcing immigration laws. And you mentioned Bill Clinton, who was the signatory on the 1996 immigration laws, which really tightened things up, and which the advocate community complains about all the time. Those 1996 laws were signed by Bill Clinton to toughen up our immigration laws. And the Democratic Party's platform at least gave lip service to immigration law enforcement until 2016. In 2016, for the first time, the platform of the Democratic Party did not include the boilerplate language that, of course, we have to enforce our immigration laws. And that reflects, I think, a change of mindset within the Democratic Party, where As you note, a lot of candidates are coming out and saying we should basically let everyone in, unless they're like convicted criminals or terrorists, proven terrorists. Everyone should come in, and I just think that would have really bad consequences. People say, well, but they're fleeing violence. But if you let everyone in, you're going to get the violent people coming in too, right? Why wouldn't they come? Unless you've got a conviction that is known to the United States of a crime or a terrorist act. If we have the policy that without a conviction everyone gets in, we're going to get everyone. And that's going to be, I think, a big problem for the country.
Professor Ting, a lot still to come on this, even though the president's made his decision on border closure or not closing it, at least for the next several months here. Thank you very much for your insights. We greatly appreciate it.
Okay, we'll all be watching.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Professor Jan C. Ting teaches at the Temple University School of Law. He also served as Assistant Commissioner of Immigration and Naturalization Services at the Justice Department during the George H.W. Bush administration. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.